Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with me tonight. I apologize for the late start. It's been crazy. A lot of crazy stuff happening these days, but I am here with you. So let's have another late night conversation. Let's put on the music.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here with all of you tonight. It's been a wild few days indeed, but we are coming out of this. We are getting ourselves together, and a lot of exciting things are happening. The amount of books that I have sold of the Kamala Harris book in the last few days is not small by any means. And I think that something that was meant to happen, something very, very special, is starting to unfold. And I don't know exactly how this ends up. We're at the very beginning of this election cycle, really. I mean, we still got months to go from here. So a lot of things can happen between now and later. This is going to be a wild time, but yeah, roll with the punches. And I'm really glad that you're here to be with us. So just a quick, the way we do these streams, as always, it will probably be a little shorter tonight because I'm exhausted and I've been dealing with a lot. But the way we do these streams is I give my opening remarks, and then from there, I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then from there, I answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. So if you have something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, send me a super chat, send me a Rumble rant on the Rumble or a super chat on YouTube. That's the way we do it. That is the way we do it. And we'll go from there. And that's just the way we do things. So yeah, quick couple announcements. First of all, every morning on the CPI YouTube channel, we do have morning messages. And let me pull up the screen that goes with the morning messages. Go to the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel. Every morning at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, they premiere the morning messages. And of course, just like we try to do one every morning, occasionally we miss a day here or there, but we would prefer not for obvious reasons. It's a great way to just start your day with revolutionary hope and optimism. So go and subscribe to the CPI YouTube channel and start your day with the morning messages. That is the link. I'll drop it in the other chat there for the CPI YouTube channel. We'll schedule one for tomorrow. No worries. We'll schedule one for tomorrow. I see we've got a number of submissions that have come in, and that's really, really great. And submissions are appreciated. And yeah, we having them. We're going to pretty soon be reaching our 100th morning message. We're going to try to stay on a roll with these morning messages. And so if you would like to make a morning message to the CPI community, one thing that you can do is you can submit a morning message, and we have a link and where you can make a morning message submission. So you can follow that link and submit your own morning message. And we'll obviously approve it first. We have to make sure it's in line with what we want, but it's a way that you can be involved in the work that we do. You can support your fellow members of the Center for Political Innovation community. So there's that. So yeah, watch the morning messages. Start out your day with revolutionary hope and optimism, and submit morning messages if you'd like to contribute. You can do it that way. So yes, the way these streams work: roll call, and then from there, first opening remarks, then roll call, and then from there, I answer your questions for the rest of the night. So keep the questions rolling in. Wow. I promised to not talk about the book too much tonight because you all, we talk about that a lot, and, there's a lot of other things that we need to focus on. It's a great thing that happened, and, I'm really happy about it. I'm pumped, and a lot is going to be happening in the next few days. I've got some shows I'm going on, and we're going to be doing something very, very special related to the book. You'll hear about next week, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about that, right? The book, it's now for sale because Lulu is not processing sales of it. And because it is not on Amazon, that's what started this whole mess. Because of that, it is now available. It is now available on the website Gumroad, and it is the PDF. You can buy the PDF on Gumroad. And the link is down below in the chats or in the descriptions. And it's also here. I will drop it in the link. And if you want a copy of the Forbidden Book, here's where you can get it. Here's where you can get it. You can just buy it on Gumroad. And we have sold quite a few on Gumroad already. We had quite a few sales on Lulu before they mysteriously froze the transactions. This is an ongoing situation. I'm going to be going on a number of shows. You saw me on Kim Iverson. I was on Jimmy Dore. They've released some of the segments from Jimmy Dore onto YouTube. This is all very exciting. We're very, very happy about it. And it shows that I was right about Kamala Harris all along, and that they are so afraid of what I had to say about Kamala Harris. They're so afraid of it that they felt a need to suppress it, which is surprising, but it shouldn't be surprising. Kamala Harris is somebody who should not be president of the United States. And I mean, there's really no question about that. And there seems to be very powerful factions that are very interested in making her president of the United States. And she is so obviously not somebody who should have that job. She's unstable. She's dangerous. She's vengeful. She has a lack of empathy. She's insecure. She's all the things I describe in the book. She's got a bizarre past, doing awful things as a prosecutor, etc. I talk about all of that in the book. And in the book, I talk a lot about American politics with an extreme amount of depth. The book is not simply just throwing everything but the kitchen sink at Kamala Harris. So, no wonder they decided to suppress the book. I was talking to somebody, and I was wondering, why did they suppress this book? Why are they threatened by this book? Well, they're threatened by it, number one, because it's an attack from the left. Now, what does left and right even mean anymore? I don't know. I don't know what left and right even mean. It's very confusing, but because I'm very obviously coming at things in the text from a Marxist and socialist perspective, because I've spent my life as an anti-war activist, because my critiques relate to things that are supposedly important to the left, like mass incarceration, etc. That's one thing. Second, it appears that the issue of fatherhood and etc. that touches a nerve in certain communities in the United States. In addition to that, Kamala Harris is trying to present herself as black. That she's trying to present herself as somehow being African American, and she is the daughter of a woman from India and a man from Jamaica, and the man from Jamaica she loathes and is estranged from. And so that kind of tears apart that narrative. So I feel like that's what the issue is here. New Yorker magazine ran an article today that said, more or less said that it was like a rebuttal almost intended at my book, saying things like she doesn't speak about her childhood very much. I think she does. But anyhow, I promised you all I wasn't going to talk too much about the book tonight because there's a lot going on, a lot of other topics that need to be addressed. folks, the only thing that is going to make a difference right now is a movement. Let me emphasize that. The only thing that is going to make a difference right now is a movement. You know, books are great. Books are great, but if people read them and it doesn't inspire them to take action, they're just kind of entertained by them, doesn't matter. Internet conversations like the one we're having right now, they're great. But if people hear them and it doesn't get them involved in taking action, doesn't get them involved in a community, it doesn't really help. And everything I do on this channel is intended to recruit you into a movement. I want you to know the joy of having comrades. I want you to know what it's like to be part of a real organization. Not an online fan club, but a real organization. And that is the whole purpose of what it is that I'm doing here. That's the whole purpose. And if you've never been part of a movement, if you've never participated in a movement, you wouldn't know what that means. But a movement is really ultimately what we need. And I am very lucky that I became politically mature in the age when there was an internet, but there was no social media. And because there was no social media, there were certain websites. And I looked up different communist groups when I was a teenager, and I ended up joining. I was briefly around one, and then I joined the other. And I was in the other for 8 years. And one of the most important things that ever happened was I was a college student. I had just joined the Marxist group I was in. And there was a guy from Detroit. I was in Cleveland. There was a guy from Detroit who was driving up to Buffalo, New York. And he was driving from Detroit to Buffalo. And so he offered to let me ride along. So he picked me up in Cleveland and we went up to Buffalo. And the idea was, he'd buy me a few meals and get to know me politically. And also he would, I would help him, load up some stuff from Buffalo. So I was in my college dorm room, just kind of chilling. He picked me up, my comrade, and we drove up to Buffalo, New York. And when we got to Buffalo, New York, we visited the house of a woman who was over 80 years old. And we came to the house. This elderly woman was there. And her daughter was in the other room. I think her daughter made jewelry for a living. Her daughter and a friend were like working on jewelry they were going to sell at an upcoming Renaissance fair. They were in the other room. And she was there in her living room, elderly woman, retired, with her daughter in the other room, shining jewelry she was going to sell at a Renaissance fair. Just a nice little suburban home in Buffalo, New York. Sat on the couch. She was so happy that we'd come to visit her with her daughter in the other room. And she decided to get out the photo album. And so we sat in this living room in Buffalo, New York, right next to the Canadian border. And she got out the photo album for me and my comrade. We looked at a lot of very old black and white photographs. These were not photographs of people, just photographs of random people. These were not photographs of, random things or whatever. These were photographs of the communist movement in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And I sat in her living room, and she turned page after page in this old photo album of pictures from the bad old days, from McCarthyism. And she showed me photographs of the day in Buffalo, New York, in the steel mill, Bethlehem Steel, big steel plant that was in Buffalo, the day that they fired every single worker at the Buffalo steel plant who was a member of the Communist Party. The company was given a list by the FBI of all the steel workers who had been members of the Communist Party. And it was a significant number. It was, a good 20, 30 people, because the Steel Workers Union had been built by the Communist Party. And it was a union plant. And the communists had organized the steel mills. And the communists, they had built United Steelworkers, the Steelworker Organizing Committee of William Z. Foster and Gus Hall. 1948, they fired every steel worker who'd been a member of the Communist Party. And so the next day, there was a protest out in front of the steel mill. And the protest was a demonstration saying that steel workers had the right to join any political party that they wanted to join: Democrat, Republican, Socialist, or Communist. I saw these pictures of people in their suits and ties, 1948, walking in circles with very well-made signs calling for political freedom and civil liberties for steel workers to be a member of whatever political party they wanted to be in. And she showed me these photographs of this protest that had happened out in front of the steel mill in Buffalo, New York. And then she told us the story of what happened the next day. She did not work in the steel mill. She was a teacher, and she taught at an elementary school. And she had gone to this protest to support her steel worker comrades who'd been fired from their jobs at the steel mill. And the next day, as she was teaching her elementary school class, she was called down to the principal's office. She walked into the principal's office, and there were two FBI agents standing there. And they had photographs of her at this protest. The principal said, "Is this you at this communist demonstration?" She said, "Yes, I believe that steel workers should have the right to be in any political party that they want." He said, "Well, you're fired." Later, she was able to get another job as a teacher. She was teaching at the elementary school. She had another job. She's teaching. Called down to the principal's office. There's two FBI men. A photograph of her handing out a communist newspaper. A photograph of her shaking hands with a local well-known Communist Party leader. "Is this you? You're shaking hands with communists? You're distributing communist newspapers? Yep, you're fired." And later, she ended up getting a job at a telephone company. She was a switchboard operator back in the day where, they connected calls, etc. And FBI came to her job there. She got called in. There's two FBI men. They got photographs of her at communist rallies, communist demonstrations. And this you? Yeah. Well, the phone company said, "Are you going to talk about communism on the phone with people when they're having their calls be placed?" She said, "Absolutely not. I would never do that." I said, "Are you going to talk about communism here in the job? Are you going to be trying to recruit other people here at the company to be communists?" She said, "No, wouldn't do that. Leave your politics at home. I'm just here to do my job." The phone company said, "Okay, all right. Well, as long as you're not going to do any communism here, we don't care." And the FBI men left. They were rather disappointed. They were hoping to get her fired from her job, but her job didn't care. They cared at the elementary school. They cared at the other elementary school. Phone company didn't care. And so she was able to have a job finally. And that's what our comrades had to go through in McCarthyism. Reminds you a lot of cancel culture, doesn't it? Wanting to get people fired from their job for political activism, wanting, following people around and making them untouchable because they said the wrong thing or they talked to the wrong person. And that's what our comrades went through. And there were over 200 Communist Party members who went to federal or state or local prison during those years. The National Board of the Communist Party were sent to federal prison for violating the Smith Act. And they were charged with teaching an ideology that would necessitate the violent overthrow of the American government. And it wasn't just teaching, it was conspiring to teach an ideology. Now, the language of the Smith Act is very interesting because it said you cannot teach or conspire to teach any ideology that would necessitate the overthrow of the American government. And why is that language so important? Well, it's very important because at the time, the Communist Party could very effectively prove in court that they had never called for the violent overthrow of the American government. They had advocated a peaceful transition to socialism. From 1935 onward, they called for the creation of an anti-fascist Democratic People's Front. They believed that the road to socialism would come through such a Democratic People's Front, etc. But that didn't matter because the law did not say teach the necessity of the violent overthrow of the government. Teach any ideology that would necessitate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. And so what the Communist Party leaders were convicted of was not anything that they had ever done. They were convicted for things that Karl Marx wrote. They were convicted for things that Vladimir Lenin wrote. One of the main items on display, one of the main pieces of evidence against the Communist Party at the 1948 Smith Act trial, Foley Square in New York City, one of the main pieces of evidence against them was the book The State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin. And that book says that a violent revolution is necessary to break apart the old capitalist state. They were sent to prison for 5 years, 4 years, 8 years. Different sentences were given. They were sent to prison for things that they never said, people on the other side of the world said, for books that they distributed. That's what our movement has been through. And some of the realities of that period, people find them hard to believe that they ever happened. One thing that happened during this period is most public libraries kept all Marxist books behind the counter. They didn't have them on the regular shelves where anyone could just look at them. And all the communist books were behind the counter. And in order to get them, you would have to go to the librarian and say, I want one of those books. I want one of these restricted access books. And they would write your name down, write down your information. And there was a good chance you might get a visit from the FBI that night. Why were you looking at these books? Are you involved in subversive organizations? That's what our comrades went through. It sounds a little bit hard to believe, but it is true that in the 1940s and then in the 1950s, in order to look at a Marxist book in a public library, you had to identify yourself and show ID, and that might result in you getting police harassment, getting questioned by the FBI. That's the period in which our comrades organized. They understood what political repression and what we now call cancel culture was all about. And things changed. Things changed. The culture changed. There was a big shift in U.S. society. But the point is that our comrades survived. They survived. And, you know, one story that I heard, and this is important, is that, you know, there were, you know, the woman who brought me into the Workers' World Party, she had lived through these years. Her name was Frances Dostal. Her parents had been in the Communist Party, and she had been in the Workers' World Party. Founding member, she'd been in the Socialist Workers' Party before that. And she was quite elderly. And there was a couple in Cleveland that were in the Communist Party USA. They were also quite elderly. And this couple, you know, couldn't, when it came to communist politics, they couldn't disagree more with Frances. Frances was saying, don't vote for the Democrats. Frances was saying, we need a rally in the streets. The Communist Party was saying, you have to vote for the Democrats. Just follow the labor union leadership. They disagreed with each other vehemently about how to organize, about what to do. They were in two separate organizations. And these were two organizations, the Workers' World Party and the Communist Party, that did not get along with each other. But they always talked about how Frances, whenever she would see these old couples, you know, these couples, you know, this old couple that had been in the Communist Party, even though they were on vastly different sides politically, they had different analysis, especially on Palestine. They disagreed. The Communist Party took a pro-Israel position. She was always pro-Palestine, anti-Israel. Whenever she saw them, she would just get very, very warm and be very, very affectionate, like they were the best of friends. She saw other members of the Communist Party, not so much. Other members of the Communist Party saw her, not so much. But this old couple, they would light up. They would light up when they saw Frances, and Frances would light up when she saw them. My comrades told me they wondered about that for a long time. And finally, they had confronted Frances. They said, why do you like this couple so much? Why do they like you so much? What's going on here? You're in two separate political groups. You don't agree with each other. Our two groups are fighting with each other. Why do you like this couple so much? And she finally spit it out. She finally gave the answer. They didn't name names. They got called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and they refused to name names. And they went to jail for refusing to name names. And she remembered when people that she'd trusted, when people who she thought were her friends had sold out and named names, had sold out and denounced and disavowed, and this couple had refused to do it to the point of going to prison. And so as far as Frances was concerned, they were some of the best people she'd ever met. Didn't matter if they said vote for the Democrats. Didn't matter what. These were her comrades. These were her brothers and sisters. Because they could have named names. They could have ratted her out before the committee. They could have given a list of all the people, and they refused to do it and went to jail. And they were okay in her book, as far as she was concerned. And that is something that I wish we could get back in our movement. You know, years ago, this is a much more recent story. In 2010, I was an activist in Cleveland, Ohio, and I got the word that the FBI had raided the homes of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in Chicago. Right? This is a small Maoist group that was being investigated for some of their Palestine solidarity activism. We got the word that the FBI had raided their homes. And the next day, we went and protested at the FBI headquarters. Our orders in the Workers' World Party was this political group, this other communist group, has been raided by the FBI. So the next day, we were out in front of the FBI headquarters in Cleveland, in front of the Cleveland Justice Center, with signs, FBI, stop the raids, and I assumed when I was on my way to that rally, we had our little signs that we'd made with poster board that we bought at the drugstore. I assumed there'd be 4 of us because there were 4 members of the party. When we got there was actually quite a few people there. And I was surprised. Who were all these people? Who were all these people at the rally? And they were people that I knew from Cleveland. They were older folks who had marched against the Vietnam War and were in like pacifist kind of groups that would go to the peace vigils that they had at West Side Market every weekend. They were people from the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers. I thought, why are all these people here? Because they were old, and because they knew, they remembered. They remembered COINTELPRO. They remembered when the FBI would go to people's houses and destroy their lives for their political beliefs. They remembered when the Black Panthers were being murdered, and they remembered McCarthyism. Some of them were old enough to remember McCarthyism, and they knew that the only response to the FBI raids on Freedom Road Socialist Organization, the only appropriate response was solidarity. The only appropriate response to that kind of political repression, when people are targeted for being anti-imperialists, when people are targeted for standing up for justice, the only appropriate response is solidarity. Period. Period. That is the only appropriate response. Because when people don't do that, we all lose. And this is something that so many people that live in this internet culture just can't wrap their minds around. If the government comes after some political group, it doesn't fucking matter whether they agree with you about Stalin or not. If the government comes after some political group, it doesn't fucking matter if they're anarchists or Trotskyites or Maoists or libertarians or whatever. If people start getting locked up, if the FBI starts coming to people's houses for their political beliefs, it does not matter. You stand with them no matter what, because if we don't do it, they're going to come for all of us pretty soon. And that is a basic part of what it means to be an anti-imperialist activist, what it means to be a progressive person. Before woke took over leftist politics in the United States, this is something that everybody understood. They understood that when the FBI killed Fred Hampton, it wasn't the time to comment on whether or not you thought the Black Panthers had the correct political line about forming a separate black organization. At that point, everyone had to say, hands off the Panthers. And this is something that people just don't understand. They just don't understand this, but until people start to understand this, we are going to be in a world of hurt. Until we understand this, we are going to be in a world of hurt. And I have hammered it home on stream after stream after stream, and I have said it over and over and over again. And there just needs to be a basic understanding that you don't name names. You don't name names. And if someone is targeted for doing the right thing, you stand with them. Period. End of story. And if we can't get this through our minds, if we can't understand this, there's very, very little hope for organizing. And we will understand it. We will come to understand this again, because the way the country is moving right now, with the Uhuru indictment, with all the things we've seen over the past years, we're going to learn this. But we need to learn it sooner than later. We need to learn it now. Right? We'll learn it. But how much trauma are we going to have to go through before we learn it? How much hardship are we going to have to go through before we learn it? How much repression are we going to have to endure before we learn that the only way we can stop this from happening is to stand together as one? Right? We have to relearn this lesson. This used to be common sense. It used to be common sense that if you're in the factory, right, the sit-down strikes. They used to have a song, if the boss won't talk, don't take a walk. Sit down, sit down. If they give the can to a union man, sit down, sit down. Well, what's that second part? They give a can to a union man. Well, if they fire a guy who's in the union, right, all of the union men go on strike because they're demanding a union contract. And the union contract says that you can only be fired for specific reasons. So if they wrongfully fire one of your brothers, doesn't matter if he's a nice guy, doesn't matter if he's fun to hang out with, doesn't matter if he's a Democrat or a Republican, doesn't matter if he owns firearms, doesn't matter if he's a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jew or an atheist or a Muslim. If they give a can to a union man, sit down, sit down. You go on strike because the only protection you have from getting wrongfully terminated is that your brothers and your sisters in the factory will do the same thing for you. That's the only protection you've got from being wrongfully terminated. So if they give the can to a union man, you sit down, you sit down. Very basic. Very, very basic stuff. And again, we're going to learn this. Things are gearing up for a time period where we will learn this. Oh, we will learn it. We'll learn it. We will certainly learn it. But the question is, how long is it going to take us to learn it? How many hard lessons are we going to have to learn? How many failures are we going to have to experience? How many people are going to have to go to prison? How many families are going to be broken up? How many people are going to commit suicide because their life is destroyed and their career is destroyed for saying something that's true? How many hardships are we going to have to see before we learn this? How many? We're going to learn it. Those old folks, they learned it. They learned it the hard way. And what I would like is for us not to learn it the hard way. I would like for us to learn from the knowledge of the past and of generations past and not have to learn this the hard way. Great example, Waco. Right? Waco, the Branch Davidians, a religious sect, very, very conservative, I think Zionist, pro-Israel church in the middle of Texas, charged with some kind of illegal gun possession, something or other. What did the U.S. government do? It had a standoff with them that lasted for weeks, then ultimately it firebombed and killed them all. Do you know who one of the big supporters of the victims of Waco, who struggled for them to get compensation, was? It was Ramsey Clark, who I used to work for. Former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark filed court injunctions for the people at Waco, fought and demanded reconciliation for the people at Waco. He didn't agree with them. He wasn't a Branch Davidian. He wasn't pro-Israel. He wasn't, of that particular religious sect, and that particular religious sect may have done some bad things. That religious group may have, there was some weird things about it. Like, I think the leader married everybody or something. None of that matters. Did they deserve to be killed? No. Did they commit any crime that merited being burned alive? No. No, they did not. And on top of that, did those people in Waco, did they get a fair trial? No, they just got burned alive. Well, that's wrong. It doesn't matter if they're Branch Davidians or Jehovah's Witnesses or whatever. Right? And the left, the genuine communists in this country, protested against what happened at Waco. And they supported the victims of it. And Ramsey Clark, who I used to work for, filed because it was a crime. It was murderous. I think 33 people were burned alive in the compound. And mainstream media tried to say it was okay. Well, the leader, David Koresh, said that he was Jesus. Well, he didn't actually say that, but even if he had, is it a crime to say you're Jesus? Not in America. You can say that, right? They said, well, the group had bizarre sexual practices. Again, is that a crime in America? I think go to Pride. You'll see that it is definitely not a crime in America to have bizarre sexual practices. And even if it was, they would deserve a jury of their peers. They didn't deserve to be burned alive. And, that what happened at Waco was wrong. And Sherry's right. It is just like MOVE in Philadelphia. 1985, the MOVE House bombing. Another very strange religious sect, vegetarians. They wouldn't, they protested against the zoo because they thought it was unfair to animals. But the U.S. government went against them. The U.S. government went against them, and they were targeted. And so it became the duty of genuine progressives and others to stand with them. And that the way they take away our liberties is when we develop the mindset of, oh, this happened to someone I don't like, so it's okay. When people develop the mindset of, oh, this happened to someone I don't like, so it's okay, we're all going to be screwed. And I shouldn't have to tell you this. This is something you all should know. But I've been doing this longer than most of y'all have. Even though I'm only 36, I feel like an old man. Every day I feel like an older and older man. I'm only 36, but I continue to feel like I'm ancient because I remember a time when people knew this. People don't know this anymore. People don't know this anymore. And so I have to sound like the old man lecturing people about the principles of solidarity in the movement, but it's true. And this is why woke culture is so wrong. And this is why, Donald Trump is clearly a better candidate in this upcoming election than Kamala Harris is. Woke says that you can't stand with anyone if they're at all politically correct in any way. Woke says you must disavow. Woke is McCarthyism. Wokeism is McCarthyism. Woke says it is your job to call out anyone on your Facebook friends list who says the wrong thing and disavow them performatively. Woke says you get points for tattling on somebody. You get attention for yourself if you do that. Woke says that if someone's accused of something, you immediately assume you know all the details, even if it's really fucking complicated. You assume you know everything about it, and you give your opinion to the entire world, and your opinion better match what everyone else on social media is saying. Woke is evil. No, woke is not just being aware of systemic racism. Woke has a real meaning, and woke is evil. And that's why I support the January 6th defendants. I want every last January 6th defendant to be freed. There needs to be a blanket amnesty for every single January 6th defendant. Why? Because if they can set up a situation where people think they're allowed to go into the Capitol and go in and then put them in jail for 25 years for it, they can do that to anybody. That's called entrapment. I've been to many protests in Washington, D.C., and not at a single one of them did we ever have the option of just strolling into the Capitol with our protest. Not once. January 6th happened, and it was allowed to happen. It was allowed to happen. And again, you may not like Donald Trump, and you may not like Donald Trump's supporters. You may not like the Proud Boys, but if they can do it to them, they can do it to you if you're legitimately against them. And that's what woke people don't understand. They're not legitimately against them. Woke people largely are in line with the interests of American imperialism. American imperialism is trying to change the narrative about what it is. This isn't the America of the Ku Klux Klan anymore. Oh no, this isn't the America of Jim Crow anymore. This is a new America. We've had a complete woke makeover. We are the paragon of human rights and civil liberties and all of that. And that's why we have the right to go and overthrow the government of Venezuela, because Mr. Maduro, he said something racist and sexist. And that's why we have the right. That's why we should be sending loads of weapons to Ukraine, because Putin is not politically correct. And it is an attempt to say we in the United States are not a repressive society founded in slavery anymore. No. We're a society of people that are all virtue signaling, and it then gives the moral authority for regime change. That's what wokeism is really about. And we are not interested in helping U.S. imperialism tweak up its image. We are interested in replacing imperialism with a new system. A new society for working families, where there's jobs and education for all, and economic growth is encouraged, and countries trade with each other on the basis of win-win cooperation. And I got to tell you, there's many examples where I have been confronted with this reality. For example, there's one group that, they were being raided by the FBI. I don't think it was the FBI. I think it was the local police were raiding them. It was a group called Black Hammer. And honestly, I don't know that much about what they're accused of. And still to this day, I know that what they're charged with in local, like Georgia courts, they're charged with actual crimes, but I don't know that they're guilty, right? I don't know the details of the case. What I do know is that this local black activist group that included, black activists who call themselves communists, they did a lot of things I didn't like, right? And I even had a sentence attacking them in my BreadTube book. I had a sentence where I spoke harshly and negatively of them. But when they were being raided by the FBI or by the local police, I was horrified by what I saw on social media. Because all over social media, there were all kinds of people cheering on the police going after this group. And I said, wait a second, hold up. I understand this group has said and done some things that, I certainly disapproved of when I heard about them. But that said, I'm not going to cheer the government going after a group of black activists. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I don't know if they're guilty of the crimes with which they're accused. I don't know that. Why in the world was all of communist Twitter cheering and laughing and gloating about the fact that the police raided the home of a group of black communists and arrested them? Right? Again, you can say, well, I looked into it, they're guilty. Okay. If they did some bad things and all that, that's a messed up situation. That's not something to celebrate. And on top of that, you shouldn't assume that things are true. And when the police are kicking down the door of people that have a similar view to us, why would you cheer for that? Why would you do that? And I've noticed that there are certain people, and I just keep coming back to this because it tells you exactly what kind of person they are, who just couldn't wrap their minds around that. Oh, no, they're bad. And I said, wait a second, hold up. Like, maybe they've got a bad position. Maybe they've done some things, but the government no, they're bad. I saw on the internet that they're bad. They're bad. I saw it on the internet that they're bad. Well, okay, maybe they're you saw that, but that doesn't make it okay. Right? No, I saw on the internet that they're bad, and I saw it on the internet and they're bad. Certain people had that attitude, right? And I should have known from the beginning that such people needed to be just completely gotten rid of. I needed to completely kick them out, exclude them at that point. Because if they'll do that to somebody else, they'll do it to you too. And the leaps with which these people go to find a way that I am blown away, right? Uhuru has been indicted by the American government. I'm doing everything I can to support the Uhuru movement, despite disagreeing with them on a number of questions. I have gotten messages from people. I kid you not. There are multiple people on the internet who believe and have tried to convince me that the American government has indicted the Uhuru movement to give them publicity. The Uhuru movement has been indicted by the American government as a conspiracy to give them publicity, to help them get attention. And so we shouldn't support them. And I heard that, and I said to the person, if the American government wanted to give them publicity, they could boost them. They could have them on an American government television program. They could give them grant money. There's generally a lot of other ways the government helps people than indicting them. Have you ever had a relative who's gone to prison? Did that help them in any way? And I know what it is that this person who's not involved in any group, who's just chronically online, is jealous of them. Oh, they got all this attention and I didn't. And they disagree with me on this thing. So there must be some way that I don't have to support them. And the leaps and the backflips that I see these people do in their head. How can I... And what it really gets down to is these people are not in a group. They're on the internet. And on the internet, everyone's competing with everybody else. No one understands that the way you do things in real life is with real groups. And so they're on the internet. And, on the internet, you're just constantly playing a game of who the good people and who the bad people are. And it's constantly a game. And they don't understand that in real life, when people really get arrested, it really destroys their lives. And then people don't understand that. And I mean, in their minds, it's just, and so this kid was determined that Uhuru was indicted by the American government to give them attention. And so therefore we shouldn't support them. And I just, it's like, how do these people come up with this? But it's like they're starting from the premise of, I'm jealous. I'm all alone by myself. I'm jealous of the amount of attention that these people are getting. I want that attention for myself. So therefore, I've got to find, and it's really sad. It's really, really sad It is extremely sad. That's another thing that we ought to talk about now, is that this notion that social media attention is what we're all striving to get is a big problem. And I mean, who am I to say that? Here I am streaming on YouTube. I can see the I can see the viewership and all of that. But look, it's something I'm struggling against on my own. I don't want to care about social media. I'm not saying that phrase I used to say on here. I'm not saying that no more, because I don't want to care about social media. And it's interesting because it's easy to tell yourself, I don't want to care about social media when things are going badly. Right now, I'm getting some play. I'm getting some attention. I'm getting a lot of good attention right now because of the book I wrote about Kamala Harris and all that. But I'm trying to not get sucked back into it, because social media currency at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It might feel good in the short term when you're getting it, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make your career. It doesn't really matter that much, and it doesn't last very long. Look, the way social media works, I figured this out, is nobody knows anything about anything. Everyone knows about 2 sentences about whatever topic is floating around social media. So sometimes the 2 sentences that people know about you are bad, and sometimes the 2 sentences that people know about you are good. And most of the time, no one knows about you at all because you're not on their radar screen except for your specific bubble, your specific community. But generally, when you're getting a huge amount of attention on social media, no one knows anything about anything. There's just 2 sentences. All right. So right now, the 2 sentences that a lot of people know about me are good. Caleb wrote a book about Kamala Harris, and they're censoring him and suppressing him. That's true. I did. I wrote a book about Kamala Harris. It's been out for 4 years. Amazon banned it. That's true. Now, there will be a few people that buy this book, that read this book, that become part of this community, that listen to these streams more frequently. And my hope is that those people will eventually join the Center for Political Innovation, come and be part of In Real Life Things, make morning messages, and they'll become really involved in this. But the majority of people that hear about me in this moment where I'm getting some attention, they'll think, wow, Kamala Harris is bad. They'll listen to a couple of things that I've said about Kamala Harris that is bad, that reinforces what they already think about Kamala Harris, and they will click through. And they're allowed to do that. That is their right. But the amount of people who do that really does not have much bearing on how much we change society. The amount of people that click through, hear me say things about someone they already don't like, use some of my talking points, and then move on, the amount of people who do that doesn't really matter. I'm here for the people in the chat, and you know who you are, who have come into this community and they've gotten hooked. They listen to these streams. They make morning messages. They've joined CPI. They're on our Saturday calls, our Zoom calls. They come to our conferences and events. That's who I'm here for. And if you're watching this right now, my hope for you is that you will become one of those people. And in fact, the whole reason that these streams exist is so that you can become one of those people. And in fact, honestly, these streams need to not serve any other purpose. I still use a news hook occasionally. I still play the game a little bit, but honestly, I'm trying to do it less and less and less because I realize how rigged it is. I realize how whatever. And honestly, my goal is to build up a layer of people who understand what it's all about. They oppose imperialism. They stand with the countries that have broken out of imperialism. They love their family. They love their community. They love their country. And they want to save America from imperialism. And they can rely on each other. And because they can rely on each other, they can effectively carry out operations and get things done to spread the message. And that is a very realistic goal. And we have been pretty successful in carrying it out. It ebbs and flows. We have successes. We We have shortcomings, etc. And but if we can do that, we can be a successful community. And I'm not going to go over all of our achievements on here, but that has been how we've operated. And that's what the Center for Political Innovation exists to do. And part of that is that we will stand with Uhuru, and we will stand with the January 6th defendants. And we will stand with people that are under attack. When people are under attack, we'll stand with them. And that's all there is to it. And, take note. Take note of how many people just can't get this. And some of them will learn it eventually. Some of them will learn about solidarity eventually. Some of them will learn that clicks and likes and all that don't matter, and that what actually matters is what we can actually do. Some of them will learn it, and some of them won't. But take note of how people act. And take note of how people respond to situations. Take note of how people grow and improve. People who may have acted one way, they learned. They made a mistake. They improved. They've learned to understand things. But one thing that I will say this, right? And this is where I might lose some people here. Some people hear me talking this way and they say, Caleb, don't talk this way. Don't say this stuff. Well, I'm going to say it. I don't care. I don't care. Look, I would not be standing here if it wasn't for people who taught me things that I did not know, people who pushed me to do things I did not want to do, did not believe I was capable of doing. I am here because I made mistakes. I am here because people allowed me to make mistakes. People gave me advice to try and prevent me from making mistakes. People pushed me and nudged me to do things that I would never have done. And that's how you grow. That's how you grow. And I'm speaking to men in particular, young men. Right? Women are better than men in so many ways. Women have their problems, sure. I mean, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but men, a big problem, especially for young men who have huge bookshelves like this, is that no one taught us anything. No, we learned it all ourselves. We memorized all the facts. We know it all. No one taught us anything. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, that's not true. And there are many things you cannot learn from a book. Knowledge comes from correct, practical experience. That's where knowledge comes from. It comes from engaging in activities. You learn by doing. You learn by doing. And I've always told the story of how thankful I am for the day when I was 15 years old that a group of communists shoved newspapers into my hand and said, we're going to go out and sell the paper. I was horrified. Oh my God, you want me to go out and sell papers to people I don't even know? You want me to try to get strangers to give me actual money for a newspaper about communism? I can't do that. And they said, yeah, you can. We do it all the time. Right? And I went out and I was so nervous. I got so nervous trying to sell newspapers to people, but I did it. I told you, the first newspaper I ever sold. Couple, they saw me. I was wearing my athletic jacket. And a big O for Orrville, Ohio on it. It's the town I grew up in. And the man said, well, I don't agree with communism, but you go to Oberlin College. I like Oberlin. They've got a good football team or whatever. He thought I went to Oberlin College and he bought a newspaper from me. That was the first communist newspaper I ever sold. I thank God for that day. If they had never shoved a newspaper in my hand, the stack of newspapers in my hand, if they had never said, no, we do this all the time, pushed me out there to go and sell newspapers, I don't know where I would be. I might have become a drug addict. I might have become, my mental health could have spiraled downward. I don't know where I would be if they had not given me that nudge and told me you can do this, demanded it of me, and sent me out there to fail, to walk up to people and have them say no to me, walk up another person, have them say no, to fail selling newspapers. And after I failed and I failed, I learned how to do it, and I got better at it, and I got better at it, and they made me do it. It wasn't voluntary. In fact, it was probably illegal, right? I look back on that now. I would never do something like that. I would be too afraid of going to jail. I was a minor. I was not an adult. I was 15 years old. And, they sent us out on the street to sell newspapers. We didn't get to keep the money, I'll tell you that much. We weren't getting paid minimum wage. It was probably illegal, right? I got labor trafficked. The communists labor trafficked me. Well, they didn't labor traffic me. They asked me to engage in volunteer outreach, and I am glad they did, because it saved my life. It saved my life. And I would never have learned that. You could have given me 100 different communist books about how to organize, how to build a group, but if I hadn't had those newspapers shoved into my hand and been sent out there on the street to do that, I never would have learned. Right? And this is what being in a real organization means, right? And look, you have to, at some moment, look, I think I'll just say this, right? And there's a lot of different ways to come at this, a lot of different ways to explain this. But I think the biggest thing that a lot of young men need to understand is that we love you. And that sounds corny, and that sounds hokey, that sounds silly, but we love you. We love you. And because we love you, you're not on trial. You don't have to prove yourself. If you don't know something, no one's going to think less of you. If you make a mistake when you go out, no one's going to judge you and think you're a failure. You're not on trial in this movement. You're not. And because you are not on trial, you don't have to prove yourself. And you can just learn to love the community. I'm not even going to criticize your behavior, because your behavior is secondary. It's based on a way that you feel. And so many of the young men that I know, they feel that they are on trial. Especially young men who are attracted to this kind of politics. They feel that they are on trial, that people are judging them, that they have to show that they know it. They have to show that they know it. They have to show that no one's teaching them anything. They have to show that they're the best. They can't put themselves in a situation where they might risk failure. They might risk looking bad. They can't do it because, and then they gotta know everything, and they gotta demonstrate what they know. You're talking to them, and they gotta cut you off in mid-sentence to explain that they know what you're about to say, to show that they knew what you were about to say before you said it. Oh boy, it's hard to deal with them because they are so determined. They are their own lawyers, and they are on trial for their lives. They have got to argue their case. I am a smart person. I am intelligent. I am worthy of life. You are all of those things. You are. We love you. You don't have to convince us that you are worthy of love. You don't have to convince us that you're intelligent. You are. And we respect you. And we want to give you the love that you deserve. And we want to help you feel safe enough in our community that you can listen to other people. Right? We want you to feel safe enough that you don't feel like you're on trial. You don't feel that you have to be your own lawyer. You don't feel you have to be arguing and proving to everyone how smart you are, because we respect you and we love you. And then based on that, you can go out and learn and make mistakes and have setbacks and do things where you might not look good for the moment because you don't know how to do them. I want to let you feel safe enough. And there's nothing I can do to, it's not like I'm going to criticize you. I'm going to be like, you need to, no, doesn't work that way. The only cure for what a lot of young men feel that I see constantly, the only cure for it is love. The only cure for it is love and patience and understanding that it is rooted in a deep pain. And that it's something that nobody should have to go through. No one should be as insecure as I was when I was a young man. And many of the young men I encounter are. No one should be that insecure. Right? These young men should feel loved enough in a community that they don't feel a need to prove themselves and that they feel safe enough to take risks. That's not easy. It's not easy. And you'll get there someday. You'll get there someday. If you stick around. I mean, if you leave, if you run away, you're not going to get there. Or maybe you'll find it somewhere else. I don't know. But if you stick around this community, you'll get there eventually. You'll get there eventually. But it's a lot like the movie Malcolm X. I don't know if you've ever seen the Malcolm X movie. Not the book, but the movie. In the Malcolm X movie, there's a whole thing about how Malcolm X, he's in prison, he's converted to Islam, but he doesn't want to pray on his knees. Now, it's been pointed out to me by members of the Nation of Islam, this didn't actually happen. Because Muslims around the world, they do this, they pray a certain way, or they kneel a certain way, they bow a certain way. They call it salat or something, right? But the Nation of Islam doesn't do that. So this whole thing in the movie about he's not willing to bow and do that whole thing, Nation of Islam doesn't do that. So it couldn't have happened. So it's a fictional thing. But regardless of the fact that it's fictional, it represents a real thing. That Malcolm X, having been a criminal, having been somebody who had a very hard life, was on the defensive. And it takes a real security to let your guard down. It takes a real security to accept guidance. To accept guidance. To see someone who can lead you and help you to do great things and let them lead you to do it. And if you're insecure, and if you feel that you're on trial every day, and you feel you have to prove that you're worthy to exist, you can't do it. You can't. But my hope is that someday you will get to the place where you can. And that ultimately it is your conditions, your relationships, it's a lot of things in your life that will get you to that point. But there is an internal component to it. There is an internal component to it. And when the time comes, you will be torn. Am I ready to actually be led? Is it safe enough for me to let my guard down? And I'm here to tell you that if you can let your guard down, and if you can accept leadership, it feels amazing. When you finally make that leap, you finally say, you know what? I am going to trust. I am going to follow. I'm not going to beat my chest. I'm not going to tell the world I know. I'm not going to defensively try to show how strong I am. I am going to humble myself and follow. It's not an easy thing to do. But when you can actually do it, it feels amazing. It feels amazing when you actually do it. And I experienced that in the Gulf of Aden when I was on the ship from Yemen, from Iran, trying to deliver medical aid to Yemen. And giving myself to God, I experienced that, and it felt amazing to take that burden of insecurity off your shoulders. To be willing to let your guard down, to be willing to acknowledge something stronger than you, something more powerful than you, something that is not you, something that is beyond you, that is leading you toward the light, that is enabling you to be better if you will follow. It is an amazing thing. And again, I can't fake it. You can't fake it. You can't preempt it. It will come. And when it comes, it's a sign that you're healing. It's a sign that you're happier. It's a sign that you're more secure. And I hope that you can eventually find the security to take leadership, the security to work with other comrades, to achieve a common aim, to pull together, to have collective victory. My hope is that you can eventually get to that place. But until then, I'm still here for you. I'm not going anyplace, and I will work with you. And this is what I would like people to understand. Knowledge comes from correct practical experience. You learn by doing. You learn by doing, and you got to just go out and do it. And we have to stand together as we build a movement. We have to have each other's backs. We have to not turn against each other. And that's my message for you all tonight. And I hope that some of the wisdom that I gave you here tonight was helpful. I hope that somebody gained something from it. So anyway, on that note, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Names and locations. Dum-dum. Bob in Troy, New York. You are always the first one, Bob. I'm impressed. Auckland, New Zealand. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Killian and Carmen in Texas. When you're in Texas, look behind you, because that's where Killian and Carmen are going to be. Omar Reina from Toronto, Ontario. John McCarthy in Chicago. Vancouver. Philip I in the house. Rachel Winder in Georgia. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. John McCarthy, Bandigo, Australia. Carter in Minnesota. Patch in Arizona. Garan from Croatia. Sierra Leone, Denver, Minnesota. Ryan in Kansas City. Dan Niswander in Los Angeles. Crooklyn in Brooklyn. Benson, North Carolina. Uno Trudeau's regime. Singapore. Alex in Brazil. Joseph in Cure Beach, North Carolina. Florida. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Names and locations, names and locations. Denver, Colorado. April and Chris in Salt Lake City. Patrick in Maine. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Waka, waka, waka. All right. Tijuana, Mexico. Tijuana, Mexico. Gabby in Chicago. All righty. Names and locations. Anybody else? Harwich, Cape Cod. St. David's, Bermuda. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Alrighty, so I'm going to start answering super chats. Well, first we got a Rumble rant. But yeah, if you got a super chat, send it. Super chats are a great way to support the work that we do. They're not simply a matter of supporting the asking me questions. They're also they are also related to supporting it. Yes, Phil High made a petition about my book being banned from Amazon. Very kind of you, Phil. And I will post your petition right now. As I said, the book is available on Gumroad. Yeah, Phil did a very kind thing, and he made this petition to support, demand Amazon reinstate Caleb's book. So here is the link. Thank you, Phil, for making your petition. Phil is very good at making petitions, as you can see, and he made a petition. So very good. We appreciate it. We do appreciate it, right? So yeah, there we go. Here it is. Here's a much shorter link to the petition. All right, so the first Rumble rant is from Unknown. And Unknown says, 1 week, fake poll, Kamala beats Trump. Your book banned. Kamala campaign ad. All the woke leftists cheered. The brainwash storm will continue. Your work is one heck of a vax against the Kamala virus. Well, thank you, Unknown. I do appreciate it. I'm hoping that the people that are reading my book now, I hope they all get something out of it. I will say that this book is very, very communist. I talk about Stalin in here, and I talk about a lot of stuff that, if I had known this book was going out to such a big audience that it was going to blow up this big, I might have written it more carefully. But you know what? That's not the way it happened, and I'm proud of this book. I think this is a great book. I think it's brilliant, and I think that you will learn a lot from it. And, I think it's good that a lot of random Trump supporters and others who sympathize with me against censorship are going to read it, and good, great. I'll take it. You know what I'm saying? I was pretty harsh on Trump in chapter 3, and I probably wouldn't do that under the current circumstances. But that's the point. I wrote this 4 years ago, right? I didn't write this because I'm meddling in the elections or whatever. I wrote this 4 years ago, And they chose to remove it from the market after 4 years of sales. 4 years. And we've got a very exciting plan. Peter Coffin is amazing. Peter Coffin is so skilled in so many ways. And Peter Coffin did some amazing work today. In like 2 seconds, he was just like, oh, you need that? And it was like, wow. So Peter Coffin is just utterly amazing. And I'm not going to tell you about it yet. There's surprises coming up. I am going on a couple big shows this weekend. Looks like I'm going on George Galloway's show on Sunday. Also looks like I'm going on Do Dissonance podcast on Sunday. Right? So far I did Kim Iverson, I did Jimmy Dore, I did Sabi Sobs earlier tonight, and on Sunday I'm going on George Galloway, mother of all talk shows, 3 p.m., and then that's Eastern Standard Time, and then it looks like I'm going on Do Dissonance podcast, which, I know a lot of people in our community really like them. And there's a lot more invitations after that. So a lot is going on, and that, they don't like this book. So there you go. All the more reason for you to read it. All right. PCUSA and CPUSA broken up. That's old news. So I was around when PCUSA was formed. I was in the Workers' World Party, and I was at the point where I agreed with PCUSA probably more in their analysis of history. And the people founding PSA were particularly kind of annoyed with me. Why don't you quit Workers' World and join PCUSA? And I mean, I didn't want to say this to them at the time because it would have been denigrating. I don't know, but it was like Workers' World has an office. Workers' World has in real life events. Workers' World has a former U.S. Attorney General they work with. You guys are an internet club. Now, PCUSA has changed a little bit over the years, but at the time that PCUSA started and for the following few years, PCUSA very, very much seemed like an internet club, and I was not impressed. And I may have agreed with them more, but I was just not ready to, I wasn't going to leave a group that had real international connections, a real office, real members. I wasn't going to leave them for an internet club. Right. And that, I stayed in the Workers' World Party. As frustrated as I was with them, I stayed in because they were a real group that did real shit. And CPI has always been a real group that does real shit. It's hard to do real shit when you don't have a huge budget, but we still manage to do real shit. We exist to do real shit, to carry out operations. What is your function? What is your function? That is what you should look at any organization. Any organization. I don't care what it is. The local chess club. What purpose does it serve? Well, it serves the purpose of preserving the ancient Persian board game of chess. Nay. It serves the purpose of recreation. It serves the purpose of giving people something to do. It serves often the stated purpose and the actual purpose don't line up. And if an organization is not fulfilling a function, it doesn't exist, right? That chess club exists for a reason. And if the reason for it to exist goes away, it stops existing, right? And this is true for any organization, right? If an organization does not perform a function, it stops existing. Organizations exist because they serve a purpose for somebody. That purpose is often something other than their stated purpose, but that purpose exists. Why does your church exist? Right? To worship God. Okay. But, your church also exists because it's a social network for people. Your church also exists because it's a place people can release their emotions in some cases. Your church also exists because there's all kinds of reasons your church exists. And if your church stopped fulfilling that need, people didn't need a community to be part of, people didn't need to release their emotions, if people weren't looking for that kind of guidance, then your church would stop existing, right? And that there's many, any group that you are part of, a fraternity. Why does a fraternity exist? Well, it's to advance the values of Phi Beta Kappa. Well, no, it's a drinking club. It's a drinking club, right? It's a kind of a loyal brotherhood of guys who get together and drink a lot of alcohol and party and are kind of a social network, okay? But if it stopped being that, it would stop existing. right? And so with any organization that you're part of, you have to find out what the purpose of the organization is, and you have to carry out that purpose, or else you have no reason to exist. And that there are a lot of people that start groups, in particular communist groups, on the internet. They start a Facebook group. I'm the new Revolutionary Workers Combat League. And they sign up all their friends, and it becomes a chat list. And does the group ever do anything? No. Do they have conventions? No. Do they have events? No. Do they just, it becomes a Facebook chat group. You know, well, is that, I mean, that is a purpose. It is a Facebook chat group. And, you know, I'm a member of many Facebook chat groups. So there you go, right? And this is one of the Facebook chat groups of which I am a member. And that, you know, I mean, and, you know, if you don't understand what your function is, the other thing, well, I mean, the other thing is if your group, and this is a very important thing to remember, if your group has very, 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 very specific beliefs, right? If your beliefs are very basic and general, not so much. But if you have very, very specific beliefs, you can't have only people who accept those very, very specific beliefs. It doesn't work. Well, great example. Like, let's say that you have an obscure communist organization, right? And you follow the teachings of Enver Hoxha from Albania. Okay? And your group is only for people who follow the teachings of Enver Hoxha, the leader of socialist Albania. In order for that group to exist and not just be a Facebook group, it has to carry out a function. There are very few people in this world, in the United States at least, maybe in Albania there's a lot of them, but there's very few people in the United States who are willing to become full-on Enver Hoxhaists. And those who do are a very, very unique group of people who are going to follow a very, very specific ideology, very specific interpretation. So in order for that group to flourish, there have to be all kinds of people who relate to it in some way, who don't follow Enver Hoxha of Albania, who are involved in labor union organizing that the group does, who, you know, are going to anti-war protests that the group does, who help the group public. If you're going to have a very, very, very fanatical belief, right, a very, very, very specific esoteric belief, the only way you can maintain such a group is there has to be a bunch of people outside of it, a bunch of layers outside of people that are involved and don't agree with the very, very specific belief, but get something out of the function that the group performs, right? You have to have, if you're going to have a core, you have to have a periphery. And the more extreme your core is, in order to flourish as an organization, the bigger your periphery needs to be. And that's one thing a lot of communists that I see organizing don't understand. It's like, if you are going to be the one true party and you got all that, you better have a really large number of people who are willing to work with you, who appreciate your existence because they like your function, who don't agree. You know what I'm saying? Right? Right? And that's the way these things work. Right? Right? Hold on. That's the way these things work. But anyway, I don't know. I continue. I digress. All right. So yeah, when Peace USA was formed, I wasn't very impressed with it. You know, as the organization has developed, I've actually, they've spoken at CPI conferences and stuff. And like, there's people that are still in that group that I'm friendly with. There's people that have recently moved on that, I guess I'm friendly with, whatever. I don't, and the Communist Party USA, I mean, that's a whole nother story. I mean, again, that's a whole nother thing. But, those two groups, Peace USA was formed, I think, 2013, 2014, around that time, right? Angelo D'Angelo, the guy who founded Party of Communist USA, he's from Staten Island, New York, and he's particularly old now. He's, but he was in Staten Island, New York, and he was in the club of Staten Island, New York, the Communist Party Club of Staten Island. And, he was, an old school communist, like Gus Hall, like, he liked the old Communist Party. And as the Communist Party became what it is today, and, just kind of a Democrat party club, right? As it became kind of a Democrat party club, he was kicked out of it. And Angelo did something that I thought was kind of clever. And I mean, I thought it was smart. For years, Angelo just pretended he was still a member. He and his club, the 5 people or whatever in Staten Island, New York, they were kicked out of the Communist Party. And they just said, nope. And they were the Gus Hall Action Club, I think is what they were called. And they had a website, and they're like, no, we're still in the Communist Party. Well, what was the Communist Party going to do? Sue them? And they just pretended they were still in the Communist Party. And they went to protests and handed out leaflets for the Gus Hall Action Club of Staten Island. We're the Gus Hall Action Club of the Communist Party. I think they even showed up at conventions and were escorted out. And they just pretended they were still in it for a long time. Brilliant. And it was just, that was what they did, right? No, you're going to kick us out. We're going to pretend we're still in it. And it worked, it worked for a long time. And they were the network of people who appreciated them and said, okay, well, maybe you've been kicked out of the group, but you're still pretending you're in it, and we're still going to be your friends. And when they got to the point that they formed PCUSA, there was a number of people who, many of whom were older people who had been in the real Communist Party, and they formed PCUSA with them. And, it was, another organization, unlike the Communist Party, you might not be able to do that. They would sue you. They would make a big point of you're not. But the Communist Party is so weak and soft-handed in the way that they operate that, throughout the 90s, early 2000s, Angelo just pretended he was still in the Communist Party. And what were they going to do? They didn't do anything about it. The Communist Party rarely speaks in its own name. And so, they just, whatever. Look, I'll say this much, right? All these people who thought they were going to take over the Communist Party, this is a case of making your own mistakes. I could have told you from day one. And that's something you can't learn from a book. Okay, on paper, yes, you can take over the Communist Party. On paper, you can study the Communist Party's constitution, and you can get the majority of the votes and all of that. But anyone who's been in these groups in real life knows you can't do that. Right? Knows that these groups are very small and isolated, and they are certain people's property. Right? And that, no, you can't play Model UN, and you can't, but I have the majority of the votes. No, doesn't work that way. Right? You can't do that. And, and if you were planning to do such a thing, first of all, you can't, because so many groups have tried to take over the Communist Party over the years, and you can't. And the second thing is, the stupidest thing to do, if you were actually planning to do that, is announce it on the internet, right? Just announce it on the internet, right? It was very, very silly. And I watched this, right? And it was very, very silly. And for the first period they were doing this, I think they were doing everything they could to try and make sure that as few people in the Communist Party listened to me as possible. So they tried to link my name to their campaign that I numerous times over and over again said, I have nothing to do with this. I don't agree with this. Right? And then after they threw me under the bus, they continued their very silly campaign. And now, after how long, they finally figured out that they're not going to be able to play Model UN and get all the votes and take over the Communist Party. Well, I could have told you that 10 years ago, but why listen to me, right? And that's, again, that's kind of what I'm talking about. There's this competitive attitude, right? It's all a big competition, right? And, hey, if you don't want my help, I'm not giving it to you. You don't want to get along with me. I have no need to do that. And that goes for a lot of different people, right? If you've dissed me, if you have made clear you don't want reconciliation with me, why on earth is it my job to chase after you, right? I have learned, if I've learned anything in the last 2 years in particular, no chasing after people. If you drag people along, eventually they get mad at you for dragging them along. They might go along with you for a while, but if they feel that they're being, compelled to do things they would rather not do, eventually they just get mad at you and hate you. You know what I'm saying? You can't guilt trip people into doing things. You can't beg people to do things. If people don't want to do stuff, it's very, very hard, to convince them to do it, and it's dangerous. If you can trying to get people to do things they don't want to do is dangerous. Your job as a leader is to actually get them to want to do it, not get them to feel they have to, not get them to feel they have to please you to do it. Your job as a leader is to get them to want to do it, right? And that's a lot harder, but that's what your job is to make people want to do things. And, so people don't want to get along with me. I have absolutely no obligation to chase after them. I don't. I mean, why would I chase after such people? And I don't understand why some people just have it in their minds. Look, if people want to work with me, they're welcome to. But when people go out of their way to not work with me, what am I supposed to do? Run after them going, oh, please work with me? No, I'm not going to do that. Right. And I don't understand why certain people think that makes me sectarian. It would be one thing if people wanted to work with me and I said, no, I won't work with you. I'm better than you. I don't do that. It would be one thing if people said, let's let bygones be bygones. And I said, no, I'm holding a grudge. I'm still angry about this thing. I don't do that. But people have gone out of their way on numerous occasions to say, we don't like you. We don't want you around. Awful things. And I continue to have people insist that it is somehow my job to chase after these people and go, please, please. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I'm just not going to do that. I have no desire to do that. I don't gain anything from doing that. Right. And we as an organization will only get demoralized by doing that. And at the end of the day, the people that we would be doing this for are not who we're trying to reach. We're trying to reach the masses. We're trying to actually get to the point that we're bringing in new people and we're not part of an internet niche, right? We're trying to become an outreach-oriented group. Some people are working very, very hard at that, and it's not easy. It's a very difficult skill to learn to be outreach-oriented, but it's what we have to do, right? But there are some people that are just so committed to this idea that we should be chasing after people because they're famous on the internet. No, that's not how it works. My goal is not to be famous on the internet. Right. And the sad thing is, right, this is why social media is a brainwash. Right. Is that people think it is my job to chase after people who are famous on the internet because they think that that's organizing. And if you look at what certain people are doing, that's exactly what they are doing. There are certain people that are more internet famous than others. And there are people running behind them as lapdogs going, oh, can you make me more internet famous? And it's just like, it's the most cringe thing I've ever seen. Right. And I mean, okay. And maybe you'll all get internet famous together. Maybe you all will figure out at some point that being internet famous doesn't mean real organization, doesn't mean getting actual shit done. And maybe then you'll want to be nice to us, and maybe then we can talk. But it is not my job. It is not my job to teach things to people who don't want to learn them. It is not my job to beg people to work with me who don't want to work with me. And just because someone's internet famous, and so what? You know what I mean? I don't care. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I guess I'm internet famous right now. For the next 2 minutes, I'm internet famous. So there you go. Right? I don't know. I might be not internet famous next week, or I might be internet famous again in a bad way next week. I don't know. But what I know is that all that matters is building the real community that I'm trying to build. I'm trying to build a real in-life organization, an in real life organization. And the people that I care about are the people who've chosen to join that in real life organization. And my goal for you with these streams is to get you into that in real life organization, to be part of it. So, I mean, look, if I get more internet famous, I get less internet famous, whatever, you know what I mean? Whatever, right? I've got a job to do. I'm looking for people who will do the job with me, and that's that. All right. People say that Kamala is the most electable candidate. I mean, it's absolutely silly. Look at an electoral map. Look at the states that matter, the contested states. Ask yourself about those contested states. Those, what are they, swing states? Look at those swing states and tell me, you really think Kamala Harris is going to pull those swing states? I don't. If you think that, you're a bit delusional, my friend. Kamala Harris is going to lose if it's a fair election. I mean, look, I don't want to say more, but I mean, who knows? Give me the details on Norman Thomas, the Socialist Party, etc. Okay, so the Socialist Party of America was this big, broad tent coalition that existed in the United States. It was crushed during World War I. It was Eugene Debs, the leader of it, went to prison for opposing World War I. After World War I, Eugene Debs was still in prison for opposing World War I, but there was a guy named Reverend Norman Thomas, who was an Episcopal minister. He became the leader of it. And they denounced the Bolsheviks, and they denounced the Soviet Union. That was their big thing. They believed in a planned economy, but they were against the Soviet Union because it was not democratic. It was authoritarian, right? They were social democrats, and in Norman Thomas's case, they were pacifists also, which is a little bit weird, but that's because the Socialist Party of America never really became a big party. In Britain, you had the Labour Party, which was like a big social democratic party and all that. But the Socialist Party of America was never like the Democrats or the Republicans. It was never a major party, right? So that's what made it different than other social democrats. So like they were pacifists, and a lot of labor union leaders were in it. And what was weird is those labor union leaders, their unions would vote for Democrats and Republicans, but in a lot of ways, the Socialist Party was kind of a club for labor union leaders. Labor union leaders, they had to, if you lead a labor union, you understand class struggle. They were Marxists on some level, but, we live in America, and the two major parties are the Democrats and the Republicans. So the Socialist Party was people that were in labor unions that supported the Democrats, or in some cases the Republicans, but they were like full-time union bosses. They were in this club called the Socialist Party. And they had magazines, and they had intellectuals who worked with them. And then they had Reverend Norman Thomas, who was this pastor, pacifist, who was with them. And, there's a great pamphlet called Crisis in the Socialist Party by William Z. Foster. And he talks about, their convention in the late 1930s, because in the late 1930s, right, for a long time, the Communist Party were people that were aligned with the Soviet Union, people that were aligned with the Bolsheviks, and that the Socialist Party was people that were interested in socialism but didn't like the Soviet Union. But then in the late 1930s, when the Popular Front got going, when the Soviet Union was in alliance with Roosevelt against fascism, the Communist Party grew to be much bigger than the Socialist Party. And it was this big group that represented the Soviet Union and was at the center of the anti-fascist front. And so in that period, the Socialist Party kind of became all these people who didn't agree with the Communist Party, right? Because and the Communist Party had a lot of people that were around it. They were not in the Communist Party. Maybe they didn't agree with the Soviet Union, but they liked Roosevelt and they liked the anti-fascist work that the Communist Party was doing. And they were somewhat sympathetic to the Soviet Union because it was opposed to Hitler, etc. The Communist Party had this big mass of like millions of people that were around it in the late 30s. The Socialist Party at that point was much smaller than the Communist Party. And it was like everybody who didn't want to become part of that cluster around the Communist Party. And a lot of Trotskyites went into the Socialist Party, and a lot of intellectuals and pacifists and other people. But it was like the Socialist Party became the club of people that didn't want to be part of the major center of leftist organizing in the late 1930s, which was the Communist Party. And to be fair, the Communist Party kind of watered things down in those years. Earl Browder and Browderism, etc. After World War II, however, after World War II, after World War II, the Communist Party was crushed and the Socialist Party continued to exist, but it was, again, kind of a club for labor union bosses. Norman Thomas and I believe the Reuther brothers, the head of the UAW, which was a Democratic Party union. But again, Walter Reuther, Victor Reuther, the Reuther brothers that ran the UAW, they were in the Socialist Party. And they would run Norman Thomas for office every year as a presidential candidate, and he would get a tiny amount of votes. And they would have like banquets for labor union bosses, and they would talk about the good old days and Eugene Debs. And that's what they were. And then, a lot of them were very, very anti-communist. And, Max Shachtman, the Trotskyite, he merged into the organization and, they supported the Bay of Pigs invasion. They supported the Vietnam War. Right. They started taking very, very, very pro U.S. imperialist stances. Oh, I see. We've got a super chat. Right. Kamala will lock them all in camps and then give them. Well, let me finish about the Socialist Party, then I'll answer that. But anyway, they were taking very, very pro U.S. imperialist stances. It was like a club for labor union bosses who believed in socialism and had a banquet once a year. So then the anti-Vietnam War movement got going, and that was a really big deal. And it changed the course of American politics. There were so many people protesting the Vietnam War, and everyone who was a Democrat or a leftist or everyone in the country was basically confronted with the anti-Vietnam War movement. So in about like the early 70s, the Socialist Party of America collapsed, and it split three ways. And one faction was led by a pacifist named David McReynolds, and they opposed the Vietnam War 100%. They said that, and a lot of them were religious pacifists. They did the War Resisters League, which was like a group of people who refused to fight in the war in Vietnam because of their religious faith. And, they were pacifists, and they had the Socialist Party. They were continuing what they felt was the tradition of Norman Thomas, being pacifists. So then you had this other faction that supported the Vietnam War, and they were called Social Democrats USA. And they became Republicans because they felt that the Democrats had become the party of anti-war protesters and the new left, and they had been socialists, until the 60s came along. But when the 60s came along, they couldn't be on the left anymore. So they were like Republicans for Reagan. And they're still in existence. The group still exists. Social Democrats USA. I don't know who's in it or whatever, but they are like neocons. They are neoconservatives, basically. And then there was another grouping that was led by Michael Harrington. And Michael Harrington had served in the administration of Lyndon Johnson. He wrote a book that was a best-selling book in the 60s called The Other America that was about poverty. And they formed the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. And a lot of CIA-linked leftists were in it. Irving Howe, who was part of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, and Gloria Steinem, who became the face of American feminism, longtime CIA person. Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. They were not the Socialist Party of America, Social Party USA, that was fully against the Vietnam War. But they were not for the Vietnam War either. They were like for negotiating, and they were not like 100% against the Vietnam War. They were not pacifists. They were still believing that the USA should fight communists, but they wanted de-escalation and gradual withdrawal from Vietnam. And that was the Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. And Michael Harrington was the leader of it. Michael Harrington's mentor was Max Shachtman. There was another guy named Irving Howe, who was a longtime trot with CIA links. And they had Democrat Socialist Organizing Committee. And they were, I guess, the difference between them and the Social Democrats USA. Social Democrats USA were Republicans or whatever, whereas Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee, they were not really anti-war, but they were embracing the new left to some degree or other. They were interested in the new left. Gloria Steinem was the big feminist. Michael Harrington was speaking on college campuses and trying to recruit young people. And so what we now call DSA came out of what's called Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee. And it was as the Maoist communist groups were all dying in the late 70s and early 80s, especially, Democratic Socialist Organizing Committee and DSA, they had a lot of money that came from the United Auto Workers Union. And they started, putting on big conferences and reaching out to people who had been aligned with China and saying to them that, communism is un-American, and that democratic socialism is the American way, and organizing them into this new group that was called Democratic Socialists of America. And it was largely a CIA deprogramming operation, right? It was, the idea was that, it was that, they kind of saw all these communist groups as being cults. And the idea was, well, these people are in cults and they need to be deprogrammed. And so we can't come at them and say capitalism is great. We'll come at them and say, well, socialism is good, but all the communists are no good. And, and DSA was a way to de-radicalize. It was largely a de-radicalization operation by the government, is what I see it as. I mean, that's, Michael Harrington, Max Shachtman, Irving Howe. It was a de-radicalization operation. And a lot of people went into DSA, and it was their way to just kind of become college professors, or just stop being activists, stop being radicals, stop doing the communist thing and instead do the liberal thing. It was a way to do the liberal thing and still kind of hold on to some element of communism. And one thing I noticed about DSA is that it's like your winter coat. You take out your winter coat when it's cold, and then you put it back in the closet. DSA, you will not know it exists, right? People there, for a lot of my political life during the Iraq War protest days, no one knew that the Democratic Socialists of America still existed, right? But then, during Occupy Wall Street, all of a sudden they were out there and they were visible again. And the Democratic Socialists of America, it comes out when it is needed, when there's a need for it. It appears, and when it's not, it just kind of goes into hibernation. And that's, and there was a need for it to deprogram all these communists and make them into liberals. There was a need for it in the 90s around the labor unions, and they kind of rebooted and then they went away. There was a need for it with the Bernie Sanders campaign. And right now it seems to be pretty much in hibernation. But a couple of years ago, there was a big need for it. They were having big conventions. You would see them everywhere. And that's how DSA tends to work. One thing I have noticed about DSA is there are certain people that are like paid staffers that are really in the group. And this is one thing you need to notice about social democratic groups in general. The Communist Party USA is like this. DSA is like this. There are certain people that are getting paid to do it, and they're really in the group. Okay? They're really in it. And then there's a lot of other people that are members on paper, but they're not really in the group, right? And there are certain people that are getting paid that their money doesn't come from the group. It usually comes from some kind of foundation, and their job is to organize DSA or organize the Communist Party USA. They're actually in the group. They get to actually make decisions and all of that. And then there's a bunch of other people that are just kind of along for the ride. And that's how it is in these kind of liberal left groups, right? Trotskyite groups, Maoist groups, those are sects. Those are a little bit different. But in the DSA, committees of correspondence, Communist Party USA, there's certain people that are They're getting paid by other foundations. They're not being paid by the group, and they are really in the group, and everyone else is just kind of, and they have a very condescending attitude toward the other ones, right? It's like, oh, you're cute. And you talk to those people are, number one, they're not communists, right? They're not ideological in any way. And number two, those people, they do have a job to do, right? And that's the thing, right? These groups all serve a function, and they have a job to do. And so they do it. And when they're not doing, when they don't have a job to do, the group just kind of goes into hibernation but DSA, AOC needs people to knock on doors for her. AOC needs people to go out for her. So when AOC is running for office, all of a sudden, those people that are getting paid, they are very active, and they are calling you on the phone, and they're trying to get you to come to go do stuff. And they're doing stuff because they have a job and they have a boss they have to report back to. I got this many people to go out door knocking with me. They're doing stuff. And then when they don't have a job to do, the group just kind of goes into remission because there's no job for them to do, right? I mean, I'm telling you, this is, again, a group serves a function. Well, the function of DSA and Communist Party USA is to campaign for the Democrats. That is the function that they serve, right? And there are other groups that serve different functions, but that is the main function. And that's why these groups, they hibernate. And there's also there's a lot of people that are paper members of them who don't really get contacted that much. And then there's a few people that are full-time paid staffers who get paid by other foundations. And their job is to make things happen. And so the group suddenly reactivates in order to make things happen every so often. All righty. Okay. There's a famous Irish rebel song called Kevin Barry about a teenage boy who was tortured and killed because he wouldn't give them names. I should listen to that. But my strength is starting to fade, folks. I'm starting to fade, and I might get up and go to something tomorrow, or I might not. I don't know. But my strength is starting to fade. I do appreciate all the super chats I'm getting. And I have to answer the Rumble rant. Kamala will lock them all in camps, but will give them keyboards and screens, and they'll think they've won. Yeah, that's the sad state of affairs. And I think people will learn. Some people will learn and some people won't. But I believe that there are some among the confused element now who will learn, right? And that's why we have to be careful to not just completely, not do what these people have done and diss these people and make enemies out of them, because I think some of them will learn. But there you go. All right. I'm a badass. Well, thank you, Gabby. I'm really moved to hear that. I'm doing the best I can. You're a badass also. And you are. You really are doing great work. You read my mind. My wife wants us to go see that movie tomorrow. We live in a neighborhood where there's a movie theater, and my wife is like, oh my God, I want to go see that movie. So why not, right? I tend to buy things in my own neighborhood. There's stores that have vegetables in my neighborhood. I don't think they're organic. There's an organic farmer's market that they do in some of the public places in New York, but generally I just buy from the grocery stores in my neighborhood. It's a spoof of the song Surfing USA by the Beatles, but it's also, it's a spoof of the Beach Boys song Surfing USA, right? Or Back in the USA, right? Is a song by Chuck Berry. And the Beach Boys had Surfing USA, and so it's like a play on that. Instead of USA, you're going to do the opposite of the USA, USSR. And it's also a reference to at the time that song was recorded, the British military had a recruiting ad that was, "I'm backing the UK." I mean, like, I'm supporting my country, the United Kingdom, back in the UK. And so it was a play on words. It was, instead of backing the UK, they're back in the USSR, right? So it was, like the chorus, "Cruising down Miami Beach, we owe." I mean, they're obviously referencing Chuck Berry. They're obviously referencing Surfing USA by the Beatles. But then there's also the name of the song, "Back in the USSR." Like, it's a play on the military recruiting thing, back in the UK. Backing the UK is what it was, right? And that's why they did it. It's also, though, I think there's something a little bit deeper about it, is that the song is about sex, right? It's basically we're going to go to the Soviet Union and have sex with a lot of beautiful women. And it points to the fact that that there was, there was the sexual revolution played a negative role in the downfall of the Soviet Union, right? And it was kind of like, it was we're going to bring our sex playboy party culture into the USSR, and we're going to be really irreverent, and they're all doing this hyper communist thing wearing their uniforms, but we're hippies and we're just going to be party boys and hippies. There was an element of that kind of new left irreverence to it as well. But yeah, it's a song, I mean, and it's a cultural icon, right? And I guess that's why it became popular, is it's kind of deep on a number of levels, right? I mean, I'm analyzing it. It's a number of different things. It's saying a number of different things, but overall it's anti-communist, but not in an explicit way. It's in the liberal way, right? It's not anti-communist in like communism is pure evil. It's like, let's laugh at those square communists. Oh, come and keep your comrade warm. I mean, they're laughing at how like uptight those communists would be in their like uniforms and like believing and stuff. And let's just get stoned, man, and have sex with women. Woo! I mean, that's what it is, right? It's hippie, hipster, mockery with some, with like, and then they're also kind of, I don't know, they're triggering American patriots, and they're kind of, channeling some popular American rock songs, right? So it's, I don't know, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? I think, right, that album in particular, the White Album, back in the USSR is from what they call the White Album, which is just called the Beatles. And my understanding is that that album in particular, right, there's a lot of like, that song has the song Revolution on it, which is an anti-communist song, right, with the line about you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao or whatever. And I don't know, that album is, I don't know, I mean, I would say, the Beatles went through different phases, right? And that in particular, that album was very much, that was one of their more hippie counterculture and anti-communist phases, right? And Happiness is a Warm Gun, that song is about heroin and using heroin, and and I mean, the other thing I will say about the White Album, right, is that like, okay, like, you listen to, all right, so the Beatles originally, they were doing like Elvis Presley, kind of standard American rock and roll. And then they started doing more experimental stuff that they had learned from who was it? The Velvet Underground and others. And they there was some experimental stuff they started doing, Sgt. Pepper and all of that. But they were still trying very hard. They stopped touring because there had been so much violence against them, when they toured the United States. They stopped touring. They started doing concept albums. And then they started having albums, that were like works of art, right? It wasn't just like a recording of a concert. It was like a work of art itself, right? The concept album became a thing. But Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, these things, they were trying, right? White Album, they weren't trying anymore. They were so stoned on drugs, and they were, some of the songs, they were just being silly. They were high on drugs, and they're like, yeah, let's write a song about Rocky Raccoon. Yeah, Rocky Raccoon. He went in and they're screwing around. They're high on drugs and they're screwing around. Okay. There might be some good work here and there, but the White Album, Abbey Road, there's a lot of, they're just screwing around, and they're the Beatles at that point. They can do whatever they want, right? They could record themselves farting and people would buy it, right? And that's one of the problems that any artist faces, right? Is when you get to be so famous and when you get such a big following, your standards with your own work vastly decrease, because you can you can get away with doing very, very poor quality art, and there's going to be a bunch of people who think it's amazing. You don't have to be amazing. Maybe you have to be amazing at first, but once you've been famous for a while, you can do very, very badly, and no one cares. And that a lot of the songs on the White Album are just them screwing around, right? They're just, Paul McCartney always had an edge of trying to do like children's songs, right? He always had this kind of like silly children edge to him. John Lennon, on the other hand, always had this very, very dark, pessimistic, poetry edge to him, right? George, there was an element of he was becoming a Hare Krishna, and he had this spiritual awakening and became a very, very spiritual person, and he got involved in the Hare Krishna movement. They were all kind of going their separate ways. But yeah, like they started out as they were just this kind of Elvis, rockabilly standard, rock and roll group. And then they started to develop their own styles. And yeah, right. Paul McCartney's style, it's almost like songs for children, silly little ditties, right? Cute little love songs and, whatever. And John Lennon is doing these very dark, pessimistic songs with coded meaning and, whatever. And George is doing, he's gradually becoming, his songs are about like finding spiritual enlightenment and finding peace with God and such like that, right? Here Comes the Sun, I believe, right? I Me Mine. And right, you listen to George Harrison was going the George Harrison direction. How do I know so much about this? I think it was when I was a teenager, I was really into this kind of music, and I spent a lot of time reading this kind of stuff when I was a teenager. But yeah, they all were kind of going in their own direction. I did think that Stephen Colbert had one of the best lines ever, which is he said, John Lennon was a great lyricist. Paul McCartney was an amazing composer. George Harrison was a brilliant guitarist. And Ringo Starr was the luckiest man who ever lived. And it's true. It's true. I mean, I think of like a few, like Ringo Starr. He has, his songs, they all kind of sound like country songs, right? It's like, I'd like to be under the sea in an octopus's garden. He's got Don't Pass Me By, right? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've never been particularly impressed with Ringo Starr. But hey, he's a legend. And I mean, I'm sure there's an element of what the Beatles did. I'm sure, positive, there's an element of what the Beatles did that is pure Ringo that we don't recognize. I mean, they would be completely different if Ringo Starr was not on board. But yeah, they are overrated. And I don't know why I know so much about this. Somebody asked me about Back in the USSR, and I'm answering the question, and all this knowledge is coming out of my head. I did not know I knew so much about this. How did I know this? Where did this come from? It comes from when I was a teenager, I think. I spent a lot of time, Anyway, all right, folks. I'm putting on the closing music because I might be going to something in the morning. And if I don't, it's because I need sleep. And I think people will appreciate that I need sleep. We'll see. It's been a wild few days, but we're getting through it, and we're pressing through, and we're doing great things. Great things are being accomplished right now. So there we go.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.